Coming up, it is official. The New York Football Giants have their 2024 schedule. We break it down from the season opener all the way through Germany in the back end. Which games stand out to us and how can Big Blue have success? Plus, we know not only new uniforms being unveiled this morning live on YouTube, but also Hard Knocks. John Mara finally opens up the doors at the Giants facility. We'll break down the interesting angles on that too, all coming up next. Yes, my friends, it is OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where you know that we are your hosts. Over here, Adam Armert, over there, Andrew Makowitz. We're healthy, we're wealthy, we're wise, and we are ready to dive in on the New York Football Giants schedule. It gets released. I got to be honest with you, Andy. They really, if you're just going to tell everybody what the schedule is before they release the schedule, essentially, why all the pomp and circumstance? The NFL, this might be one of their missteps in spite of the fact that it is ultimately successful and everyone's tapped into the content.
They get a lot of buzz, but it sounds like, Adam, they have to alert the teams earlier because they're like, hey, do you want to take the bye week?
Do you want to make a social media video?
Yeah, social media. So I was going to ask you that. You're a big social media guy. You love all the pageantry outside of the game. Like that's what you care about. I care about inside those white lines. Clearly, you have alternative motives.
Sure.
Did you watch any of the schedule releases from any of the social media teams? Because one, the Giants completely mailed it in, which is so on brand for the Giants to not get in there because they're a storied franchise, rich tradition. They don't get down in the weeds. But man, some of these other non-traditional teams go for it and they get a standing ovation for being creative, making it fun and lighthearted. Did you watch any of them?
The only one that I watched was Detroit Lions, who had Tim Robinson, and he also had Sam, I'll forget his last name. Those two actors did the show together on Comedy Central. They're both from Detroit, took place in Detroit. So they stood there in the parking lot with this weirdo machine contraption they made up, basically a big joke for a while. And then they went ahead and said, here they are. Here's the team. I'm sure I remember from last year, though, there were a lot of good ones of blowing up other people's team graphics and, eating them and all that kind of stuff. So were there ones that I need to backlog and go check out?
Oh, yes, there were. Teams decided, okay, I'll give you a couple, and I just think it's important.
Let's not get too bogged down in this. But give me your best one.
But if you have some time, there are a couple that I think are important. One, go traditional with the Tennessee Titans. They do the show the logo on the street and ask the people what team they're playing and what they think of the team. And right out of the gate, they play the Bears, and someone's like, the Bengals. I just absolutely love Joe Burrow. And they go, da-da-da, da-da-da. It's that one is genius. The other two, very quickly. One, the New England Patriots put a full production crew together, had Julian Edelman and Rob Gronkowski as good Jules Hunting. And they made him, Julian Edelman, seem like he knew how to figure out what the schedule was beforehand. Like he was Matt Damon from Good Will Hunting. That one was just insane, Adam. It's 3 minutes of it should be nominated for awards. That's how good it was. And lastly, the Los Angeles Chargers are always someone
they did really big stuff last year too.
They did the anime thing last year. This year they did every single team in The Sims. And I got to tell you, it was brilliantly done. I mean, Harrison Butker has been in the news for his speech that he gave at college. They had Harrison Butker in the kitchen, with pies and it. I could not say enough about those. So those are the three I would highlight. Kudos. It's fun. If they're going to release all of the dates and things early on, why not have a little bit of fun with it? And clearly some of the social media teams have done it.
So we're going to go ahead and we'll be on, by the way, from a social media perspective through 10 o'clock when the Giants are going to reveal their uniforms. It's the 100th anniversary, big bells and whistles. Who knows for sure? Maybe it'll end up being a slightly darker shade of blue. We'll find out. So we will be live running all through that, and welcome to everybody in. If you're in the chat, you're talking about the schedule, throw out the dates, throw out the matchups that you really like at a very high level. Andy's going to give his just, little nugget on the schedule that jumped out to him when it was first announced. I'll say that when I looked over at it, I was not surprised, but TBD in terms of date and time for the Week 18 matchup with the Philadelphia Eagles. That's going to be on the road. So, they want to have those division matchups at the end of the season. But you don't have a division matchup before that, going all the way back to week 13 at Dallas. So I found it interesting that you'll go Saints, Ravens, Falcons, Colts, and then the Eagles. So there isn't going to be a lot of divisional conversations for the Giants in that regard. By week 13, we'll have a pretty good sense about where we are in the division, how those games have played themselves out, and whether or not that Philly game is going to be significant in any way for the Giants. So that was just my high-level view before we walk through this thing. What jumped out to you?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, Adam. Usually they start packing a lot of divisional games in December where like you feel like the division could be in balance. It essentially means that the games would likely be more meaningful, knowing that they're basically head to head for playoff positions. The Giants only have, after November 28th is when they play Dallas on Thanksgiving. Their next home game is until the last game of the season, which is the Eagles. So you're spot on the money. Like that was surprising to me that the Giants get a lot of their divisional games out of the way early. The other thing is the Giants go into this with either the fifth or the sixth hardest. What is it? It is the sixth hardest opponent's win percentage from last season. So they have schedules coming in terms of who they play. So when it came out, you were kind of like, what's the best case scenario on this entire thing, knowing that it's going to be hard. It's going to be one of the hardest roads that they have to go. People may disagree with me, but I think it kind of broke to the point where there's chunks in the season and the Giants will need to figure out how to navigate these specific chunks. And it's not, we've talked before about how it's like quarters of the season and how you're going along and how you're tracking. I don't think you really break this up into quarters based on how the schedule came out. It feels like there's kind of like must win little pockets. And then it's like stay afloat in these other areas is kind of how I'm looking at it.
Well, it's interesting, man. It's like because we'll talk. I mean, you see at the bottom if you're watching over on YouTube predictions. Well, who knows? Not really, tongue in cheek a little bit, but we'll talk about what really matters here. I will say, I do think like organizationally, not just the Giants, all teams think about it as, hey, how do we get through the first 4 weeks and you say, well, we're 2-2, so we're right where we want to be. Now it's about getting some more wins on the ledger and moving ourselves, being in position to have success on a high level. When you look over the schedule as well as we start to dive into it, notable that they open up. We're going to go specific here. I'm not going to give the teams just yet. They only have, after being at home for the opener, they go on the road 2 games back to back. That's it for the entire schedule. Now you have to throw in the trip to Germany as well, which they'll have the bye week after, and that's technically an away game, and they're going to obviously be overseas. They don't have more than 2 weeks at the start of the year when they go away from Giant Stadium. So I think it's good to not be multiple weeks on the road. Sometimes it's West Coast trips. Are you going to stay out there longer, right? Are you going to try to make it work and switch up your schedule? The Giants will always get to come back home, always get to sleep in their beds every other week. Now, maybe when you have to go out, out west sometimes, that could be a little bit of a fatigue factor. But I actually think that that's important too here, because if you want to protect home field, if you want that to be an advantage, and the fans should make it that way this season, you're going to look at it and say, hey, there's always going to be an opportunity, whether we lose a tough game on the road, to come back home and get a key win. But let's get off from the top here and tell you what we like about this. Go ahead.
Well, the only other thing I was going to say, you mentioned West Coast, and I'm just going to give like a travel perspective on this. What's good, Adam, is they have one West Coast game, and it's against Seattle. Everything else is pretty much in the Eastern time zone, except, with the exception of having to go to Dallas on Thanksgiving. A little bit of a weird situation there, but Seattle's the only team that they play on the West Coast where they're going to have to travel, and they have the Cowboys on Thursday Night Football the week before, so they're getting an extra amount of time. And then on the flip side, they have the Sunday night game back at home, so like you get a little bit more time on that side. So of all things considered, when you have to go to the West Coast, you'd like a little bit more time beforehand, you'd like a little bit more time after. It feels like the way the schedule home and away shook out is pretty favorable to the Giants.
No, 100%. So it opens up, obviously, at home. We talked about it. I gave a terrible take about who they were going to play to start the season. You thought Commanders, and you're not too far off in terms of when we'll see Jaden Daniels for the first time. It ends up being the Minnesota Vikings. So fascinating to watch here as the season opener, 100th anniversary, great kickoff. Will it be Sam Darnold? Will J.J. McCarthy get the starting gig before the season begins? Ideally, I don't care about, who's going to be more frazzled or not. I guess if JJ wins it outright, you think, oh, this kid's really ready to go. I just like the idea from a narrative perspective. It's Daniel Jones against the rookie quarterback that you could have drafted, that could have been in your building. It's at home, so it sets up for Daniel Jones and the Giants overall to come out and be like, hey, yeah, listen, maybe we should have gone with a rookie QB. Could have been so great. Here's a win right out the gates at home before we're going to hit the road.
Yeah, I like the matchup against Minnesota. The reason why I like the matchup against Minnesota is looking at the schedule, that was going to be one of the only games that we felt confident that the Giants could be favored in, right? And like when you think
Yeah,
about
yeah,
wanting
yeah.
to get off to a good start, they could have had a whole host of teams come to New York on that day. They could have had the Baltimore Ravens come in. They could have had the Philadelphia Eagles. They could have had another rematch with Dallas as a home game for the first game. Instead, they gave us one of the most favorable ones. It felt like Minnesota or Washington were the only two where the Giants could be a favorite. Giants open up game one as a 1 point favorite against the Minnesota
Yes.
Vikings. So, at least if you're
Woo.
a Giant fan and you're looking from an optimistic perspective, Adam, you get a winnable game at home early on to maybe build some momentum as opposed to one of your toughest tests right out of the gate.
Yeah, and so we'll talk about coming back here about the middle kind of chunk of this schedule, where with the trip to Germany being factored in there, where the bye week lands. Always better to have it kind of mid-season than not, especially if you're going to go play internationally as well. But week number 2, Andy wanted home opener to be against the Commanders. I got as close to my wish as I could have. Facing Jaden Daniels, rookie QB, and I wanted it on the road. So when you see them later in the season, it's going to be them coming to you, them having to come into MetLife Stadium, hopefully a loud crowd, still impacting a rookie quarterback. So they'll go on the road for Cleveland, and then they'll get that second divisional home game back at home against the Dallas Cowboys. We'll break down the middle chunk of this schedule, and Andy will tell you why maybe that's a favorable little pocket here for Big Blue coming back in just one moment. Before we do that, though, as you'll see in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, today's episode is brought to you by Personam. Personam is a cyber threat detection engine that allows you to see into your network security on a level that other companies simply cannot do. They can give you insights to where these threats are coming from. They provide you with services that allow you to detect and remove those threats without having to worry about your security and knowing that everything that you want to do from an operations level is running smoothly, much like the New York Football Giants. Personam is always vigilant and always learning. Okay, so as we turn our attention to this middle chunk of the schedule, remind everybody live on YouTube, feel free to shout out any of the interesting nuggets that you have along the way here. What do we think about this middle chunk, Andy, when we talk about, I mentioned those first kind of 4 games, that road game, the West Coast trip, as you highlighted, Seattle coming there in week number 5. Then you get the back-to-back home games, Bengals, Eagles, and then you'll get on the road with Pittsburgh. Again, teeter-tottering back for Washington, and then you get into that Germany game before you get the bye week.
Yeah, so I kind of break this down in the first 2 games of the season. We mentioned at home versus Minnesota and then at Washington. It
Yeah.
feels like, based how the schedule comes out, the Giants at minimum have to go 1-1 in those 2 games. They have to split those 2 games. If they go 0-2, you're going to be looking at the mid-September and being like, what are we in for this season? They absolutely have to split those games. If we want to feel like the Giants have a legitimate chance of being in the hunt for the playoffs after Thanksgiving, I feel like they have to go 2-0 right out of the gate because, as you mentioned, Adam, weeks 3 to weeks 8 are all teams that presumably are in the playoff hunt or have made the playoffs or are, having winning records. You talk about having to
Sure.
go to Cleveland, the Dallas Cowboys, Seattle Seahawks, the Bengals with Joe Burrow healthy now, the Eagles and the Steelers at Pittsburgh. Like that
Yeah.
is a
Yeah, the at Pittsburgh too. Yeah.
Pittsburgh on Monday Night Football. So you've got the
Yeah.
Thursday Night Football game, you've got a Sunday Night Football game against the Bengals, you've got the Monday Night Football game against Pittsburgh. You've got big prime time games for the Giants against teams that you would expect to be vying for playoff spots, if not divisional favorites. For a majority of them. Adam, this is easily the hardest stretch that the Giants have for the entire season. Weeks 3 to 8 is where the Giants will be tested. It will show what mettle this team has. I mean, we're not going into predictions, but you feel like if the Giants went 500 through that stretch, you would be, I'm not going to put words in your mouth. Would you be excited? Would you be, we need more? Would you be happy? Like where would you be if the Giants finished 500 in their hardest piece of the schedule?
Yeah, I mean, you talk about that too at the top there, right? Winnable games, quote unquote. Listen, we don't know. It's all on paper right now, but winnable games to start the season at home and then even on the road against the Commanders. But that stretch that you mentioned with Cleveland on the road, obviously, I think you mentioned about going to Pittsburgh on the road. Well, Cleveland's a hard place to play too on the road, don't forget. And then your home games are still against two division rivals and then, the Cincinnati Bengals and throwing that West Coast trip. I think you want to be successful early in those first couple of weeks so that if you sit there and you look over those next 6 games and you say 500, and that may mean getting a win on the road, maybe in Seattle, because those 3 home games in that stretch are obviously going to be 3 of, on paper, the most difficult home matchups that they're probably going to see over the course of this season. So if you have success in the first 2 weeks, then going 500 feels great, right? And like you said, we're not talking about records and win losses and how much they're going to win or lose by. I think, again, when you talk about this team, you talk about having one of the harder schedules and the state of where this franchise currently is right now, projected with a 6.5 over/under win total. Yeah, I'd feel ecstatic if they win 500 in that stretch. It seems hard to make that kind of case right now, just knowing how competitive the league is and how good a lot of these teams are. You're talking about facing Joe Burrow. You're talking about facing Dak Prescott. You're talking about facing Jalen Hurts. The saving grace in that run, and I'll include the first 2 weeks in it, 2 rookie quarterbacks. Okay, Geno Smith. I'm not putting any disrespect on his name, but he's a veteran, older quarterback. Who's going to be starting? Is it Deshaun Watson? What's going to happen with Cleveland? He hasn't been great. Pittsburgh has its fluidity at QB as well. There's at least that sense of, hey, QB wise, maybe we can rattle some cages in some of these games early in the season. That's how you steal a win or two.
Yeah, that's a good call out. It feels like there are a lot of question marks, obviously, for the Giants at the quarterback position. But if you're going to have those tough games, at least they fall kind of with some quarterbacks that there are question marks with. So I say 500 because it feels like that's a very difficult stretch of the schedule, Adam. You like,
Yeah, you'd be
I
happy.
feel like that's even an optimistic view of that stretch because it's very difficult.
Right. I guess yeah. That's where my stands. I thought, oh yeah, 500. I'd be pretty, I'd be dancing if I thought they went 2-0 to start the season. Well, hey, now look at us now. Now we're talking about 8 games through the season. We got a winning record, of course.
Well, and the issue is if the Giants go 0-2 in those first 2 games, and then you go through this
Yep.
6-game stretch and you sit there and say, is there a win in these next 6 games? That's where your mind can go. And you don't want to do that. Like, you want to be able to say, what's the most likely scenario where we're still kind of treading water, keeping the season alive, knowing that there are some difficult games in those first 8 weeks?
Isn't part of it then too, like I would add in here as well, isn't part of it too that from a fan base perspective, from a energy perspective, we want to have fun this season. Isn't it really a big part of it being like, hey, why do we need to win games early? So that we're not sitting here being 0-3 or 1-4 5 games through the year. It deflates the fan base. And if you look inside the division, you think some of these teams are going to be successful, whether or not Dallas is playoff successful, the regular season successful. Whether or not the Eagles are taking a little bit of a step back here, they're still a really good football team. So if you sit there and say, yeah, well, we tried our best, but we're still a 2-4 team, it's going to suck the air out of this organization very quickly. Even if you look down the road, as we will, and say, oh, back half of the season, there are some winnable games. There is a nice pocket that is kind of surrounded around that trip to Germany and playing against the Panthers.
Yeah, Adam, you don't want to sit here after what the Giants have been through and be 2-6 after that game against the Steelers and sit here and say, is the season over? What are we playing for? You get into the who should be a quarterback situation. Obviously, if the team isn't winning games, you get into should we even win games anymore? Should we be trying to tank for number one? I don't want that to be the case before Halloween even hits. Like, how depressing would that be if you lose the Steelers game? It's not even Halloween and you're out of it. And the reason why
Yeah.
it's so important as we kind of focus on the next set of games is because after that Steelers game, you get into a stretch of a few winnable games with a really favorable setup in terms of schedule, Adam. And I'm happy to run through it if you want, but we
Yeah,
go
go ahead.
with the Washington Commanders at home after that Steelers game. Then you go away to Germany for a road game against the Carolina Panthers. The Giants decided to take their bye after the Germany game and then are at home against the Baker Mayfield Buccaneers. That's a 3-game stretch in a 4-week period that you have to look at and say, if the Giants can take advantage somehow or stay afloat somehow in the first 8 games, that's the critical part of the season for me where it's like, okay, these are teams that you should be able to compete against. The schedule's favorable. You need to go 2-1 in that stretch to be able to say, like, we're legitimate in this situation. How do you feel about that, 3-game stretch with the bye week and the Germany game, in there?
Yeah, I think when we look at the schedule, to your point, it's funny, man. The one thing I'll mention now, listen, when you look across the schedule and you're trying to find winnable games where you feel confident about, you have to look at Carolina and say, hey, it wasn't what Bryce Young wanted in his rookie year. They're trying to figure things out on the fly. I will just note as we put the schedule up here, when you think about just that idea of, okay, sure, but you're also giving him, a big half of the season to figure things out. So Carolina, and just specifically Bryce Young, could be a quarterback we look at a little bit differently as we work our way through. That being the case, though, I think that, as you say, a home game against Washington, big divisional game. We understand it's going overseas, but when you come back in that Buccaneers, that's also at home and you get the bye week. I think the idea here would be tough matchup. We mentioned kind of that front chunk there with Pittsburgh. Okay, are you getting that? Is that one of the games that gets you 500 over that difficult stretch? Then you get home for Washington. You get another good win there, right? Now you go to Germany. Can you paint a picture where coming out of the bye, being at home against the Buccaneers and say, listen, I don't know. Bucs are going to be a tough team. They have experience. They have a lot of veteran talent there. But if I could be coming off a 3-game winning streak, that could be just the cushion you need to propel yourself through the back end of it when you get to Dallas on the road. And then we'll talk about that late chunk there with the Saints, the Ravens, back-to-back home games, but ultimately Atlanta, team we talked about coming into the schedule release to go along with the Colts, and then obviously the Eagles to close things out. So maybe that's that little sweet pocket where you grab 3 wins after treading water, and then you give yourself a cushion to get through the back end and basically be a 500-ish team heading down the stretch of the season.
Yeah, that's the way that I envision this. And Adam, the key note about the Germany thing, we obviously talked on the last show how the Giants have become like Germany's team. They're the ambassadors. Yeah. There's a reciprocal relationship there. So the nice thing is it's a Carolina home game, but the crowd will be 80-something% Giant fans, just knowing the pull that New York has, the agreement that the NFL has with Germany itself. The Giants are going to have the majority of fans there. So if you're going to go on a road game overseas, what a better place to be for the Giants. So that is an extremely favorable situation. Then coming out of it, the Buccaneers were a playoff team. They won their division. They did everything they need to do. But you're getting 2 weeks to prepare for Baker Mayfield at home. If this team is still alive, that is an absolute must-win game. Coming off 2 weeks to prepare for Baker Mayfield at home as the weather starts to shift, you would feel like the Giants would draw a line in the sand and say, that is a must-win game if you're looking for wins on the schedule right now.
Yeah, 100%. It's funny. It is important, I think, that you bring that up about, listen, it's no disrespect to Baker Mayfield. It's no disrespect to the Buccaneers, but it's, hey, if you have 2 weeks off after your bye, that's always the way it is. It's not always about the opponent. It's about the ability to prepare for them. So if you look at that coming out of there, and again, can we ever sit here and say, oh, put the Giants down for, 3-game winning streak, a 4-game winning streak? No, but it just means they feel viable. They feel like they could be winnable games. And that one, the Bucs would be put into that stretch for me where you'd sit here and say, okay, hey, like you say, you go into it, you go to Munich, Germany, you get hopefully a kind of a pseudo home game. The Giants have 9 of those this season with 8 road games. Maybe that feels a little bit like a 10th home game as well. And then you try to get a little bit of downhill energy. Now, again, I'm going to keep caveating this because I think it's just important. It always comes back this way. Oh, well, you're saying they're going to win 4 in a row. No, we don't know. We don't know what any of these teams are going to look like. Who's going to be the starting QB for some of them? You mentioned when we were coming into this, as we think about the back end of the schedule here, the New Orleans Saints. Well, are they a team that's kind of falling apart down the back end of the season? Where are they going to be in that regard? Maybe you catch them later in the year, which makes it a better matchup. Other teams, as we look at the back end of the schedule once again, a little bit trickier, because if you're talking about looking at this and saying, so Buccaneers, right, home game, then this to me, we mentioned that difficult stretch there starting in week 3 to week 8, but it's not great. Whatever the Saints are or are not, it's not great to go on the road to Dallas, home, which is good for the Saints, home for the Ravens. Very curious to see how they look to start the year. But then you go on the road for the Atlanta Falcons. And I mentioned the Colts as being a team that I would have preferred to see earlier in the year than later as Richardson gets his legs back underneath him. This back end stretch, it really does, as you kind of painted the picture there, around the bye week, around Germany, a lot of this kind of comes down to how do you succeed at the first couple of weeks and the middle portion of this season? Because it's going to be, all these teams are good. So I think you're going to be in real fights in those big 3 to 8, and then also on those last 5-6 weeks of the season.
Yeah, so after we touch upon the remaining part of the schedule, I will come back
Yes.
to some of the fan experience stuff here and how this
Yes.
feels
Yeah.
for
We
a
want to make sure
fan
we get to that
schedule
for
wise.
sure.
So I won't go into it right now, but it is important. But yes, that Dallas game on Thanksgiving, obviously a tough one in prime time. The good news is, Adam, you get 10 days after that to prepare for the home game against the Saints. Again, it's like another mini bye on a game that you presumably have to win in order for this schedule
Sure.
if you want to accomplish anything. So, like, it's to your point, it is not disparaging the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It is not disparaging the Saints. But if you have those bye weeks, you'd want them against games that you feel confident that you'd win. Whereas, like, if you're saying, okay, give me the bye week and you're playing the Ravens afterwards, you don't know how much the bye week could impact your game planning for the Ravens. So I look at that and say, Dallas on Thanksgiving, tough. Give us the mini bye week at home against the Saints, and then we follow it up and get Baltimore again back at home. So the Giants' travel schedule is pretty light around that period, which is good.
And by the way, just to remind everybody too, when you look at it, because coming out of that bye week, it's a short turnaround, right? You're going to play on the 24th against the Bucks, and then you mentioned Thanksgiving Day game against the Dallas Cowboys on the road. So putting that bye week where they put it is also advantageous, right? We're going to come back November 10th. We have our bye week, long 2-week stretch to prepare for the Bucks, but also to be preparing for the Dallas Cowboys, who you already have seen at the end of September. So you'll get a new sample size on them. You're going to try to really prepare in bulk, and then you can reset yourself again. Now we go home. Now you say we play the Saints. Let's make sure no matter what happens on the road in Dallas, let's be ultra prepared with a little bit of extra time there to prepare for that team. So to your point, from a coaching perspective, you have to look at this and say, first half of the season, we're learning a lot about ourselves. We're figuring out who's maybe going to be a bigger contributor than we anticipate. How is our secondary looking, right? Who's stepping up? What's the contributions in the run game? Wide receiver room. How is that shaking out behind Malik Neighbors? So all of a sudden, you hope first half of the season, let's learn a lot about ourselves. Second half of the year, let's use the schedule to our advantage. Let's apply a lot of these lessons and hopefully find ourselves, we talk about in years past, well, the team's just bad, right? Offensive line play is bad. They can't figure things out. Maybe it's injuries, whatever. But hopefully this season is about, hey, the talent is solid. We're not the deepest team in the world, but now it really is just about application and execution. And I think the back end of the season can actually be pretty good for the Giants if it comes to fruition, especially with these extra pockets of rest and preparation time.
Yeah, we talked about the Saints, and then we move into Week 15, which is the Baltimore Ravens. That's going to be a tough game regardless, because of the style of football that they play. But Adam,
Yeah.
the last 3 games of the season: at Atlanta, at home against the Colts,
Yeah.
at Philadelphia. Now,
Yeah.
I'm going to paint a picture for you that back part of the season is optimistic. I'm going to be optimistic about it, and I'll give you a
Go
couple
on.
reasons why. One, Atlanta. Do we know who's going to be the quarterback of the Atlanta Falcons at that time? Like, getting them later, they obviously drafted Michael Penix in the top 10. Did Kirk Cousins do what he needed to do? Are they in the playoff hunt? Did they start the Michael Penix Jr. experiment yet? I don't know. If you're going to play
Mm,
Atlanta, I'll take them
yeah.
later on in the season when there's some question marks. The other
Okay.
piece of it, I got 2 more for you, and then I'll let
Sure.
you I'll let you tell me how ridiculous I am. Next one,
Yeah. Yeah.
the Colts, Week 17.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I don't know if you've watched any Indianapolis Colts games, but Anthony Richardson plays a very physical style of football. If you were going to play the Colts, you would want to. I know you said you'd want to play them early. I want to play them late in the season. I want to
Mhm.
see him be able to hold up to all of those hits, and show that injury was a fluke, because I don't believe it is. I think the way that he plays, and he plays so hard, he is going to be dinged up and miss weeks. If the Giants can
Sure.
get backup Joe Flacco on the road late in the season, if Anthony Richardson's hurt, I like that for the Giants. And lastly, the Philadelphia Eagles, we saw last year, the Eagles kind of had a playoff spot locked up, but they were floundering. The Giants went in and won that game. Listen, it's a division
Sure.
game. It's a coin flip. Will it matter for either team? We don't know, but like, you're going to play someone in the division for the last game of the season. I'd rather it be Philadelphia than Dallas or Washington. So to me, I feel like those last 3 games came out the way that I would want those last 3 games. If you're looking at it and saying, man, the Giants are at 5, 6, 7, 8 wins, going into that stretch, can they win a couple games and make it interesting? Like, I think for those 3 games, you couldn't have asked for a better ending for the Giants.
So, well, so it's relative to the rest of the schedule. I'll start with the thing I agree with you on, and I'll actually lump in the December 15th game against the Ravens. Just like with Anthony Richardson, you talk about Lamar Jackson, he has that style of play to him. The season is long. He can miss some games. He can get beat up a little bit. If he's staying healthy and he's on the field, you don't want to have to face him. But that's an interesting version where two quarterbacks for different reasons. Anthony Richardson, bigger guy, but plays a physical style. So I don't mind that. I'll admit, I think that can work out to the Giants' advantage potentially. The Atlanta Falcons one, I'm going to dismiss because one, I don't think they're going to be bad. So I don't think that they're going to be in this, Michael Penix Jr. experiment time at the end of the year. But two, and even kind of in with that, Kirk Cousins, I understand that everyone got surprised when they drafted Michael Penix Jr. in the first round in the top 10. I get that. However, Kirk Cousins, whether or not it's health or otherwise, I would have rather played Atlanta early. Why? Because you don't know if either one of those quarterbacks are healthy. Is Kirk Cousins going to be ready to go? If he's not, is Michael Penix going to be ready to go? What would they do? So I like the idea of playing an explosive offensive team earlier in the year when they're still trying to figure things out. My assumption is Michael Penix Jr. is not going to see the field this year. It's going to be Kirk Cousins, and you're going to be playing an experienced quarterback. Now, that being the case, silver lining, the Giants played him in the playoffs a couple of years ago, and they found a way to be successful. Kirk Cousins is not, let's say, a Joe Burrow, right? So when you're balancing it overall in the schedule,
Right.
I'll say, yeah, back end's not too bad because you know who I don't want to play the back end? Joe Burrow, on December 22nd. I don't want to play maybe I'm looking at the schedule. Dak Prescott, you're still playing in the 28th. It's interesting when you think about the schedule overall and where some of the QB matchups live here. Maybe it's Deshaun Watson for Cleveland, right? Like playing him earlier in the year because he's still trying to get his legs back underneath him. We don't know what he's going to be at this point. So I don't think
you might not know what Deshaun Watson's going to be. I certainly think I know what Deshaun Watson's going to be, and that's what he's been for the last 4 years, and that's not a very good quarterback. But their defense is just so dominant that, as we saw, Joe Flacco, anyone else was back there and was able to lead the offense. That Cleveland game is going to be fascinating to me because I think Shane Bowen and the Giants defense might give some serious problems. Is Nick Chubb back healthy? There's a lot of issues.
That's a big part of it too. Yeah.
Is Nick Chubb healthy? What does the wide receiving core look like? Is Deshaun Watson going to be the guy who was 4 years ago or the guy you've seen for the last 4 years? So for me, I think that's an interesting game. The Giants will be a touchdown underdog in it, but man, if Deshaun Watson looks terrible and we put it in Shane Bowen's 3-4 zone read, all of a sudden gives him a little bit of problems. I could see that being an interesting one on the schedule for the Giants.
Just for fun here, we're going to wrap up on our scheduled conversation and turn our attention over to the fan experience, which Andy wants to touch on here as well as we lead up to 10 a.m., waiting for the uniform unveiling, which we'll also talk about. We also got some Hard Knocks too. But shout out to Michael over on YouTube. Schedule looks great, provided that Drew Lock is the starting quarterback. Better arm, reads the pocket, reads and has pocket presence, will be healthy boost to the Giants offense. So listen, well, we're not here to disparage anybody. Come on, bring it in. We don't know. It is Daniel. By the way, we look over the schedule. Oh, could they get some wins here or there? There is a real question still about what will Daniel Jones look like in camp? How will he look to start this season? I don't think there's a version where he gets benched, but also it's hard to look at a schedule. We are one of the few franchises in the NFL coming into this year that looks at it and goes, well, I guess it depends on who's throwing the football. Whether it's veteran quarterback with a rookie who's learning, that all these other scenarios are kind of, worst case, the Vikings. It's not Sam Darnold, but the journey of J.J. McCarthy begins. Well, Kirk Cousins got injured again, but Michael Penix Jr. is underway. Russell Wilson didn't work out. That's okay. Justin Fields is ready to reclaim his career. The Giants version of this is Daniel Jones still stinks. Don't worry. Journeyman Drew Lock is ready to take the reins. If not, we have Tommy DeVito waiting in the wings. So there's that comical side of it when it's at least right now for Giants fans.
Shout out to Michael for making sure that unequivocally any New York Giants news goes back to the Daniel Jones and Drew Lock conversation. We're going to get uniform releases. It's but what will Drew Lock's number look like when we do the uniform releases? Or hard knocks off season? It's going to be really exciting. Was Daniel Jones in the room when Wink Martindale got fired? Stay tuned. Did Daniel Jones cause the rift? I always appreciate everyone bringing this back to the Daniel Jones, Drew Lock, when there is actually 52 other guys and some coaching staff, on the team as well.
Nevertheless, talk about the fan experience when it comes to the schedule. Andy, generational season ticket holder, a tag that we really don't provide with you at the top of the show anymore. I don't know why I stripped that honor away from you, but what do you like or not like about the schedule from a fan perspective?
Yeah, so from a fan perspective, and this is for anyone that's a season ticket holder or anyone that is getting the schedule ready for thinking about how they're going to watch Giant games over the course of the year. Listen, one, the Giants have 9 home games as opposed to 8 road games. always nice to get an extra home game for the Giants.
Yeah.
Exciting to be able to see it. Adam, they only have 3 home games after Thanksgiving. Usually you can see a lot more kind of bubble up. There could be 4, there could be 5 home games, but really, you get the Buccaneers in November 24th, but like, yeah, that game still can be in relatively warm weather. So for me, I like that. The 6 home games before Thanksgiving as a season ticket holder is very attractive, Adam. You want to be able to go to games while the Giants are still relevant and it's not freezing cold outside, right? Those are
Yeah.
the parameters that I look at the schedule and say, can we make sure that we get as many sunny September and October games as humanly possible? Because if anyone's been to the old Giant Stadium or MetLife on like December 17th, when it's negative 12 degrees and you have to put cardboard underneath your feet, it's never a fun experience. What I will say is the big challenge is Thursday night football at home for Dallas is just the worst, Adam. Like, that they're going to put it in prime time. We obviously started last year in prime time in the pouring rain on Sunday night football. That was an absolute mess. They have
Yeah.
us on Thursday night football again. Makes it harder for travel schedules and things like that. So that, for the fan experience, not the greatest to be on a Thursday. 2 of the last 3 games of the season being on the road and one of them being in a dome for the Giants is like a positive experience just overall. You don't have to be out there, especially if the season gets away from the Giants. At least those last 3 weeks, there's only 1 home game put in there. So
Yeah.
overall, as a fan experience, I actually like the way the schedule fell out. It could have been way worse. It could have been slightly better with some tweaks to where Dallas may have fallen. But overall, I'm pretty excited from a fan viewership perspective and a season ticket holder where all this lies.
Yeah, what is it? 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 of the last 6 games will be indoors. Going back to the Dallas game on Thanksgiving, you include the Saints, you include the Atlanta Falcons, and you include the Colts in that as well. So nice indoor in the colder weather. You'll get Baltimore coming up to New Jersey, obviously. So maybe that breaks up for you a little bit. Yeah, I think overall it's good. Interestingly enough, along with the Germany game, 3 primetime games for the New York Football Giants. I'm a little surprised by that in some ways because there's low expectations for this team coming in. So they still want them in the spotlight. You mentioned last time, hey, we're talking about New York Football Giants celebrating their 100th anniversary. One of these stalwarts. We're going to talk about kind of the impact, I think, for this organization around that component. So you want to give them the spotlight a little bit there as well. What was the other note that I was going to have about this schedule here? I think I'm mostly good with it. Oh, just the Germany game, obviously. 2 things. One, the Germany game is going to be, oh, wait, do they have 4? They have 4 primetime games. Sunday Night Football against the Bengals as well, Monday Night Football, Thursday Night Football, and then Thanksgiving. I'm calling that a primetime as well.
Yeah,
Germany.
so technically they
Yeah.
only have 3 primetime games according to what NFL standards are. That is night games. They only
Yes.
categorize primetime games as night games. The Germany game's at 9:30. The Thanksgiving game is at 4:30. Those are standalone games where we feel like they're in primetime because all the eyeballs will be on them. But technically, 3
Right.
primetime games, but 5 focused games on the New York Giants.
The Germany one was the last note here. I love it, man. In a world where I could be a Giants fan living on the West Coast where the games start 1 p.m. is 10 a.m. I love the idea of waking up early on a Sunday and getting football. So I like the idea. You're over in Germany, you're getting you're getting a 9:30 start time. Nobody else is playing. That's beautiful to me. I'm gonna really enjoy waking up for like a breakfast and Giants football for that week.
Last thing I will say about the Germany game, because it is an interesting and noteworthy one. They could have maybe tried to do it during Oktoberfest, so traveling Giant fans could like get that experience while also seeing the
Ooh.
game. Feels like a little bit of a miss to not have it towards the tail end of Oktoberfest. It's in November. But I mean, that's just from a travel fan experience. How cool would it have been to be like in Munich for that and then walk straight over to the game? Would
Oh,
have been
wait, you know
epic.
what's
It
really
still would be a
exciting about that?
legendary trip. What?
Yeah, yeah, and we're coming up here. We're gonna wrap this up. We're not going anywhere. You'll see our little music play for a second to wrap up the episode, but then we're gonna still be here live talking about the unveiling of the new uniforms, and we'll also talk about Hard Knocks. But interestingly enough, uh, Oktoberfest runs from September 21st to October 6th in Munich. So you had a real opportunity here. Like you said, it's
Totally.
ironically you actually had to move it up on the schedule a little bit more. I always enjoy any festival that takes place equally out of the month of its name as it does in the month. And that's the nature of a lot of different things across the spectrum, including March Madness. I'm not really sure what's going on in the NCAA level. That being the case, my friends, we will close out with a simple, Andy. If you want, your choice. Do you want to throw out your record prediction here today on the show?
I don't, but all I will say is that really tough stretch from weeks 3 to 8. The Giants could go 0-6 in that stretch if the season is not what we want it to be. I think 3-3 would be an optimistic way to look at that. If you take that stretch and you look at it through that lens, you're kind of looking at the Giants over under is on 6.5 wins. How many wins could there possibly be if they max out? Could they get to 10 wins? I have no idea. Could they win as little as 2 or 3 games? Yes, that's kind of the way that 6.5 works. Is like you feel like it could be 3 above it, you feel like it could be 3 below it. This schedule really didn't change all that much for me in that regard.
I'll say that no matter which way you want to shake it out right now in this moment, I think when we talk about maybe those last 5 weeks, right, from the Saints through that TBD game against Philadelphia, I think there'll be 5 games on the schedule, and there's just going to be this world where we look at it and say, hey, a 3-2 record can find the Giants talking wild card positioning. I think the Giants are going to be in a good enough position to be in that discussion. And that's all we ever ask for, at least when we're talking about it at the mid-May. We're just thinking, hey, can it be interesting going forward? We go ahead and tie a bow on the schedule release, breaking it all down. No real bold predictions other than maybe the schedule broke out pretty nice for the New York Football Giants. Stick around with us as we come back in just ahead, waiting for the news on the update for the New York Football Giants uniforms. Will we be shockingly surprised at how bold the bright pink uniforms look for Big Blue as they end up changing the entire brand? Or will it be more of the same? Talk about that in Hard Knocks on the other side, coming back live on YouTube. Yes, my friends, it is still OGP, the One Giant Podcast, live on YouTube, waiting for the news about the New York Football Giants, the scheduled uniform release. We are a minute away, Andy. It's like the countdown to New Year's. Do we expect hold on. Andy has breaking news.
So I obviously went on to Twitter just to make sure to see what was going on. And the latest tweet was 10 a.m. tomorrow, and they had the schedule reveal. And then as I hit refresh at 9:59, the Giants have deleted that tweet. So
perfect.
There may not be a schedule release, or they are in fact dropping it and they don't need that one in there anymore. That would be a little bit of a bummer, but the good news is we still have Hard Knocks to talk about. So Adam, we'll see in the next minute or so whether or not that's the case. But everyone's waiting for anticipation. And when you see them delete the tweet that says 10 a.m. tomorrow, it gives me a little pause for concern in terms of them actually doing it, right?
I think we're okay. There's a social media post up about, do you know what a scheduled release video is? I still see the tomorrow at 10 a.m., but it has been shuffled down. That's the interesting part. Their timeline, it has been shuffled down a little bit in terms of whether or not they're trying to hype this up or not. So we'll wait to see about that, as the New York Football Giants could only be classy in their social media and PR department. While we wait for it, and we'll just keep refreshing, that's the classic model here for this system. The other things that happened here for the New York Football Giants are about obviously the uniforms, obviously about Hard Knocks as well. And I'm starting to develop in their 100th year anniversary a bit of a perspective about where the organization is going now. So I want to tap into that as we remind you that today's episode is brought to you by PIETENTIAL, Potential.com, online wellness assessment tool, free for individual users, sets a baseline for your wellness, gives you tools to improve over time, and tracks your progress. It's a great way to make sure that the goals you have for yourself personally are going ahead and just tracking along on a nice, smooth path. Check out Potential.com today. Okay. Andy, good evening from, hold on a second. Good evening from the Philippines. Ken coming in hot. Does that make it tonight there or last night there? I never know which way
from the future, Adam.
That'll be
from the future.
Oh my God, from the future. What's it like? What do the uniforms look like, Ken? Break it down for us live over on YouTube if you can. As we wait to find out about the uniforms, Andy will keep that up in the background. There's also this other piece where the Giants are going to be on Hard Knocks. not the Hard Knocks that you are used to seeing, where they follow the team all the way through training camp and they get in towards the regular season. This is off-season Hard Knocks with the New York Football Giants. Off the bat, you had your perspective on how you feel like John Mara handled the NFL pressure of needing to be a part of Hard Knocks. You can answer that, but also if you see something happening on social media.
Yeah, I'll keep everyone posted. It's 10:01, 10:02. They still have that. They have deleted the uniform tweet, so it is not there officially anymore, Adam. And like this would just be talk about a way to make the fans irate. Is like, we have this post ready to go. Be prepared, 10 a.m. tomorrow. And then they're like, we're sorry, we're not ready yet. You're like, what do you mean you're not ready? You've had a whole entire offseason to be able to do this. And
internet, am I right, Andy?
Maybe during the Hard Knocks, we'll find out why this was an unmitigated disaster that it hasn't come out yet.
Behind the scenes on what went wrong on the uniform release.
Like how are we messing this up? This seems like a layup, right? Give the people what they want. It's 10:02. They said 10 o'clock. It's not even there. How is this not a scheduled tweet, Adam? Like we know how it works. Like this is such an easy win that they're finding a way to mess up. I can't believe it. However, on the Hard Knocks piece of things, Adam, I think that this was insanely smart by the Giants and John Mara. And I will tell you why.
Okay.
John Mara has been vehemently opposed to doing any Hard Knocks. He doesn't want cameras in his building. He thinks it's a distraction. He doesn't want them in training camp. As we know, the Maras are the old school, traditional, institutional type of team and ownership group that is sitting here saying, we don't want any of these outside distractions. But at some point, the NFL says, knocks on his door and says, hey, John, listen, you got to get with the times. We need to make money. There are opportunities out here. You are going to have to do Hard Knocks at some point. And so with the Giants, whether or not this was brought to them or it was an idea that they came up with, an off-season, first of its kind Hard Knocks where it shows and documents from the beginning of the season ending in January all the way through July, how does the off-season shake out for the New York Football Giants? And the reason why I find it so fascinating, Adam, is because this was I think it was a genius move where all the players are away. They're all doing their own off-season work. What we're talking about are things that the front office can control. You would expect Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll and leaders in the front office to be polished at the podium, to be able to say the right things, to not have crazy things get out. And so to me, this doesn't impact the players as much as a training camp or in-season Hard Knocks would. So if you know you're going to have to do it at some point, you know the bill is going to come have to be paid, why not control it and be able to do it at a time where it's not as intrusive to the entire team and it's more around off-season transactions and strategies of how you build a roster? To me, I actually love it and find it fascinating, but I'm curious what your take is on how the Giants are approaching this.
So on the one hand, yes, like you can say, we're going to do it our version of it. We're willing to acquiesce, but only to a certain point. Also, Andy, go take a look over on Twitter right now as I respond, because it looks like we're getting some runouts of some images here. Just trying to confirm whether or not they are the official or people just go ahead and doing their fun little thing.
It just got released. And so breaking news from Giants Twitter is they're introducing Century Red, which is, to your point, Adam, it looks like the 1938 color red. And the jerseys are that rugby style that I
told you it was coming.
You're like, I love those. So it's got the red with the blue across the chest with the numbers in the white, outlined in white on the logo. I gotta say, I'm a big fan of it. I'm looking at it straight away, and I like these jerseys. So it's like not that crazy alternate jersey red. It's kind of like a darker red where it feels like it's not as intrusive. It does feel a little bit more old school. I'm a fan. I don't know if you've seen these yet, but I am a fan of these, Adam.
I have tapped into them. We are going to talk about them. I'm even going to try to do the double down here of getting a little look up on the screen for us as well. If you're watching over on YouTube, you can go check it over on Twitter as well. Get the feeds going up here. Assuming that I get it to pop up, I'll go ahead and pull it in here. Looks like let's see how well this frames in. Did it on the fly. Here you go. So this is Century Red uniforms that we're talking about. It is that rugby style, big blue stripe across the chest, outlined by white. The helmets also have kind of that Michigan
vibe,
Wolverine style. The red running back on the blue helmets. It's tan pants, like off tan kind of colored pants, and all wearing the double stripe socks along with all looks like black cleats are going to be the traditional model here. Listen, so I'm going to tie this into exactly what I was going to talk about with the Hard Knocks and with the Giants organization. And I think that Joe Schoen probably has a pretty big influence on this. So you're seeing them up there on the screen. We'll throw them back up again. You can check them over on Twitter. I'll talk about how I feel about the uniforms. I like them. I like doing something different, be unique. Like, let's do something different, even if it's not perfect or it's not your preference. That being said, I believe the reason why the Giants are doing Hard Knocks is because when Joe Schoen came in and took over as the GM, what's the first thing that he did? He said, listen, I know that Dave Gettleman likes faxing information and scouting reports around. We're going to go ahead and update and modernize ourselves when it comes to our scouting department, when it comes to our draft room. When we look at opportunities, PR, when we look at opportunities to make money, guess what? It's a business. I'm going to get in John Mara's ear and let him know we are not one of the financially flush franchises. It's run as a business. Guess what? You make money off of doing these type of uniform changes. People buy these jerseys. Guess what? It's PR and access when you do the HBO Hard Knocks. I think this is, while we all may prefer the first step be winning more football games, I think this is a part of the Giants organization getting with the times. I mentioned Pittsburgh Steelers have done this. They've worn the Bumblebee jerseys, whether or not you love them or hate them. The Green Bay Packers did this with their throwback uniforms over the years as well. This is just kind of a part of the game that you play when you're in the NFL. And I think it's far better for the Giants to be a part of that than to be holding themselves to the Giants way, which you can always do unless you're really bad for a long time. Then people don't care about the Giants way. So hopefully it's a turning of the page here a little bit.
So in the comments on Twitter, people are not pleased
Yes.
with the jerseys. Everyone is already upset. Shocker, Adam. I tend to like them. The little tweaks that I would have made is, I don't know if like the beige, brownish, khaki color
I could
for
do
the
without
pants
those.
is the best look. It kind of does conjure up like old school retro, but I don't know. White would have done just fine. It would have maybe given it a little bit of a modern pop to this whole thing. Like, I'm some style guy, right?
Right.
But the other thing
No,
that I was
that's
thinking about is the rugby jerseys themselves are fascinating to me, Adam, because keep in mind they are playing their first game over in Germany as ambassadors. This is the type of jersey that you wear in Germany and sell millions of jerseys to a new fan base, because let's be honest, the regular Giants jerseys are very traditional. There's no pop. There's nothing really to them. They're very traditional, especially the red jerseys are red, but just with the white outline. This at least gives something interesting along the soccer, football, rugby style that we mentioned before. If you're looking to sell jerseys internationally, this is definitely a good move for the Giants. So for me, like, I understand the business side of this. I like that they're changing it up. I like that they're trying something new. Listen, would we have some tweaks? Do we love the Michigan helmet? Maybe, I don't know. Like,
I'm telling you
there's a
right
couple
now,
tweaks.
I would have said you want to go blue pants instead of the tan pants, just to keep it a little more tied in with the New York Football Giants, right? And then I also would have done, you just mentioned it, the helmets. I just would have done, now maybe you would end up saying how many stripes can this uniform have, but I would have done the traditional. Give me the blue helmet with the white trim and the red right down the middle, maybe, vice versa. Even if you actually wanted to get real weird with it, I wouldn't have hated if you went full red helmet with a blue stripe accent. Like, go with the theme here. You've gone with the red jersey. So could have been some things I would have changed about it, sure. But let's be clear. If they win when they wear these uniforms, then they're the greatest uniforms that ever happened, and they should be the permanent. If they lose, they look embarrassing in them, then you'll say, well, the uniforms, of course. Not only did the Giants lose in Germany, but they also look ridiculous while doing it, right? So it's all going to be about that. But you mentioned there, man, it ties into what I said. You're going to Germany. You're trying to sell to the European market. This uniform will appeal. The jerseys will appeal to a European market. So you got to play the game a little bit. And these are throwbacks, by the way. They do have ties to the old school Giants uniforms from many, 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 many years ago. So in the 100th anniversary of the franchise, they're going to get a little inside access to them. And by the way, guess what? That's all going to be carefully curated, and you're not going to hear anything the Giants don't want you to. One other note I'll say on that, by the way, I thought it was really important actually to give that access coming off of a season and off season where it's already died down and we're not worried about it now. But remember Wink Martindale, oh, tumultuous. Was he going to be part of the team? Is Brian Dable? Is he a little bit hot-headed? Is he having a hard time controlling himself on the sidelines? Relationship with Mike Kafka? I also think there's another PR smoothing. Hey, we're resetting ourselves here. So it's all going to come down to what happens on the field. But I think the Giants, I think John Mara took a step back after this last season and said, we got to adjust the way we're viewed around the league right now because we're kind of becoming a laughing stock and one of the losingest teams over the last decade.
Yeah, it feels like a pivot. We're the losingest team in
Pivot.
the last decade in terms of wins, so that's not
Right.
great. But the issue, Adam, or my question to you is this: of all of the offseason stuff that they
Okay.
could shed light on between January and July, what's the most
Mhm.
intriguing storyline that you think has happened that you want to peek behind the curtain on?
I mean, the obvious one would be, seeing interactions with Daniel Jones, how he interacts with the coaching staff, how he's interacting with players. Do we get any little taste of him with some of the rookies, with Malik Neighbors? Because that can give you an indication about how he's regarded inside the walls. I think that's interesting. I'm probably more intrigued about the coaching side of it. I want to see how the defensive players are interacting with Bowen, how they're acclimating to that sort of thing. I mean, inner workings wise, I don't know. Maybe some of those conversations when we talk about Saquon Barkley not being here, right? When we talk about Xavier McKinney not being here, are we going to get any sense of that inside of this behind the scenes look? That would be very intriguing to me, especially another PR piece. If the Giants are trying to put out there, man, like we loved Saquon, we did want him to be a part of it, but it was a difficult choice. So we don't know what the timeline that'll fully get covered here. So I think that'll be fascinating to see a little bit of how the organization made some of these big offseason choices.
Yeah, Adam, they mentioned that it's
The
going to be
wing
from
side.
January
Yeah.
to July, and I think the juiciest, most explosive, that probably is the least relevant to
January
the
to July.
upcoming
Yeah.
season is the Wink
Yeah.
Martindale saga. I'm curious to
Yeah.
see if they actually will show it. And if you're the Giants and you have that video and Wink looks like a fool, yelling and screaming like a petulant child, wouldn't you kind of want to show that? Wouldn't you kind of want to show that Brian Dable held this cool and like this guy was a hothead? Like the Giants have every advantage to kind of do the things that they want to do. I agree
Yes.
with you in terms of some of the interesting storylines. For me, it's going to be the points of inflection and the decision points that the Giants made.
Mhm.
When did the Giants decide to go with Malik Neighbors? Like, was it during the
Yeah.
draft, or were they saying like, if he is there, no matter what, we are taking this guy? How aggressively did they actually try to move up for Drake May? And at what point did they say we are comfortable where we are at? What's the
Mm.
discussion point around JJ McCarthy? Was he ever thrown around in the building as a potential um, pick at number 6? Because everyone said the Giants were linked to him. They had an opportunity to draft him, and they didn't. When did they make the decision that they were out on the JJ McCarthy business? That will make us kind of either look smart for discussing it or look like fools if, like, months earlier, they're like, yeah, we're definitely not drafting JJ McCarthy, but let everyone think we are, right?
Well, and by the way, right, like, and it's also, hey, try to watch for the quick cut edits. Maybe you can identify the spot where they were in the war room and they said, "What are we thinking about here at 6?" Well, I really like, and it gets cut off just before QB comes out of his mouth. Or, Jay Watt is a guy that we really respect as a former NFL player, So there, you may get little snippets here where the Giants, again, trying to curate what the perspective is, how high they were on him. I'm sure, by the way, everyone scouted and interviewed and talked with Malik Neighbors. So a lot of what they're going to show you is here's all the breadcrumb trail of why we like Malik Neighbors so much. And that's fine. Show me why when Joe Shane was there visiting LSU, watching Jaden Daniels, but I'm really liking getting to get my eyes on maybe Malik Neighbors at one of these games that I go to. I'm really interested in the pro days, all that kind of thing, right? So you're going to get a picture, I hope, of what it looked like going into that draft class. And Drew Phillips, right? All these guys ended up taking. Theo Johnson. Hey, paint me the picture of how things kind of fell really nicely for the Giants. Joe Shane didn't do a lot of jumping around the draft board as has done in years past, excuse me.
Yeah. So, Adam, the one you touched on it there in terms of the draft, I like the idea of seeing when they made the decisions and they felt comfortable with how they were going to go forward. Was it like last second they're still going with Malik Neighbors? Really, for me, and this is probably just because I feel like going into day 2 of the NFL draft,
Yes.
we did a show and we talked about the need for corner. And we talked about how many corners were available and how this board set up
Mm,
really nice for the Giants to get a cornerback. I would
yep.
love to see an extended version of the second round starting and see how the Giants viewed the second round and whether or not the picks in front of them did dictate them taking Tyler Nubin. Because I still firmly believe, while I love Tyler Nubin being a New York Giant, that the plan was not to have him be drafted in the second round, and that the wave of running backs that went, did they try to trade up to get one of those running backs? Was Kamari Lassiter someone that was a focus point for them? I think it's going to be fascinating to see if like the run on corners ended up forcing their hand to take Tyler Nubin to fix the secondary, and then also inform them of taking Drew Phillips because they had to get a corner. It's going to be fascinating that day 2, day 3 to me of like how the board fell and how they reacted to it.
And what did we see in terms of phone calls coming in, right? Whether it's at 6, whether it's at the second round pick there, when you end up with Drew Phillips and Theo Johnson, was that, oh, hey, we like these guys, we're happy to take them here? Were they getting calls that they turned away to maybe back down a few spots? So yeah, inner workings are going to be fun. I find that so fascinating. If you're a fan of kind of the front office and how you construct the rosters, that's what I think we're going to get a lot of inside of this offseason, including some of those key decisions around what we do with Saquon, what we do with Xavier McKinney, and watching that unfold. So that's going to be a lot of fun, man. Shout out to Luke Bradley over in the UK, man. What is up? Are you excited? Though it's not going to be actually in your hometown. It's going to be over in Germany. But what's been your experience watching some of those? Let us know in the comments as we wrap up our episode today. But very curious to see how Europe, how London, how England, how Germany, how all of these, how Brazil, how they treat these, how fan bases really feel there, and whether or not the NFL's pursuit of expanding markets is really sinking in. Or is a lot of Americans taking trips and going over to watch NFL somewhere abroad and making it a vacation? I think those fan bases are growing, which is really fun. So get after us in the comments there. We will be taking a long break. So this will break up. You'll see this. Sorry, long break as in the weekend. This will get up there. You'll see this broken up into a couple of sections because we normally don't do episodes an hour long. So you'll still be able to get this on YouTube and on our podcast feeds, but we won't be back until Monday. So by long break, I mean we're taking off Friday. You'll see us back Monday talking about the New York Football Giants. And I think until next time, with new fancy uniforms and a schedule and nothing but glorious wins ahead, as Andrew Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand that people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.